And now the fun begins. Denise, I'm going to let you have the first question.
Well, guys, this panel is Welcome to the Fourth Industrial Revolution. How will the future change you? So I think what we're going to do is each one of these is sort of geared to someone, but all of us can jump in, and it's really about having a great dialogue, debate.
Great.
We love the diversity of thought and just getting your perspective. So, Nick, you just kind of led us through this whole adventure in technology. What emerging technology interests you the most moving forward in the next 5 years?
In the next 5 years? Okay, so the next 4 years, I'll go with blockchain, but I don't want to bore you guys. You guys are all excited about blockchain. But the thing that most excites me about blockchain is the thing that most scares me about the tech industry right now is the consolidation of power, which I feel really hurts innovation. And you see this in a lot of different industries where one company comes to dominate, right? You see it with Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, Google, but you also see it in smaller industries. And the first technology I've seen that could really disrupt it and change it is blockchain, and the capacity to create a new Twitter that is entirely decentralized and doesn't rely on a company called Twitter with a central database. So that's years 1 through 4. Year 5, quantum computing. Quantum computing is actually, I think, starting to happen. And the capacity to create a computer that doesn't rely on states of zeros and ones, but relies on states sort of infinitely in between, and can therefore be millions of times more powerful than the computers we have today. If that technology can actually work, that's going to be nuts. So that excites me and interests me, but some very smart people think it will never happen. But I don't know, companies putting billions of dollars in it, there's a chance.
Yeah, you're going to get out of it. And for all of you, what do you guys see as some of the immediate benefits and some of the long-term benefits that could happen, or consequences, either or?
Well, I mean, I think the question is, we're building these incredibly powerful tools, and as they always say, a scalpel in the hands of a surgeon is a great thing, but in the hands of a sociopath is not so great.
True story.
Why'd you look at me when you said sociopath?
No, I didn't mean to look at you. So I wasn't sure who to look at. I'm like, sure there's someone in the room who fits the definition, but well, no. So, and I think that's an issue, obviously, in how we treat these things. But I mean, that's that's the first thing people would think of. I mean, one of the things that I think is interesting, especially when you look at blockchain, but also just the information revolution, is I just have this feeling that there's so much accountability, and blockchain to me is like this great tool for accountability. But we're humans, and it's like accountability is a little scary because we're gonna make mistakes. And does this mean that everything we ever do? I mean, I look at my kids now and I see them on social media. I'm like, no, don't say that, because it's gonna be in your record forever. And so there's part of me that thinks, are we really up to having this technology that's so perfect and permanent? That's a small concern.
Small concern.
Yeah.
Maybe a large concern. I don't know.
And Houman, you had like this incredible case study. We saw the best of blockchain happening. Were there any things that you saw that you felt, wow, I wish we could have done that differently or better, or that kind of made you a little nervous?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely this concern about, what goes on blockchain stays there forever kind of a thing. I do think there are ways around it. You don't have to put everything on the blockchain, it's quite flexible in terms of what you want to do. But I think it is emerging as a technology. It's like the operating system wars that happened back in the 70s and 80s, of which Microsoft, Apple, and let's say Linux have emerged, but there were many more before. And we're kind of in that space right now, especially with smart contracts between like Ethereum, Hyperledger, Neo, all of these different sort of blockchains that are out there. So I think it's important not to take the technology as mature and approach it cautiously. So for example, with what we do, we don't put any sensitive beneficial information whatsoever on the blockchain for that purpose. Now there's a lot of really, really interesting work being done with things like zero knowledge proofs and so on and so forth that aim to address some of the privacy concerns and all of that. I am cautious, I am worried, but I'm more worried about like traditional failures like telecommunication links and all of that than I am about currently how we're using blockchain.
Is there any concern that I mean, one of the things about the information revolution and the digital age is how many people have been left out of it? I mean, is there a concern that you think people could be left out of it, and it could be kind of another way of creating inequality and disparities?
I think it's worse than that. It's not just that people are left out. It's that one of the most distressing things of technology has been it is associated with income inequality, right? The places where technology grows have seen increasing income inequality, and it may be that technology is causing it, it may be that it's root cause, or it may just be that it's coincidental, but it is certainly the case that in the last 10 years, the places where technology has improved most, like what cities have the worst income disparity in America, right? It's like Seattle and San Francisco now, right? So you can even see it at a micro level. So it's a huge worry. So it's not just people being left out, countries being left out. It's within countries and within cities, people being left out. On the other hand, back to what you said earlier, like, this is happening. You can't pause, you can't press stop, you can't throw up your hands and say, oh no. You just got to roll with it and try to make the outcomes the best you can.
You can't put the genie back in the bottle.
Nope.
Right. Let me expand on that a little bit. I want to expand on something, Nick, that you brought forward, hitting on two of my favorite subjects, the consolidation of power and quantum computing. We'll debate that one off stage.
Yes.
To stay topical.
I was hoping they would come up.
When we see new technologies hit the market and become part of the just general aura of what's happening in our lives, you can see opportunity for two things, right? And I think this is why we have co-moderators. You see this great opportunity for open systems, for more inclusion, for more information, and to have a very democratized, almost a meritocracy of technology. And on the other side, it's quite liberal, but you can also move to a very conservative capitalistic side, right? Where you by design, look to invest in an oligopoly or a monopoly, where you see a consolidation of that power, a consolidation of technology. The three of you represent a very vast spectrum on kind of the technology perspective. So I want to kind of bring it back up this way, starting with you, Houman. You would have what I would probably consider to be one of the most human, non-capitalistic things. As a person, I'm fascinated by what you do. As an investor, I have minimal interest in it, right? And so help me understand, what's your perspective on this as a humanitarian working for the UN, right? Coming from a very different world than maybe Nick and I come from. How do you see this playing out with this very new, powerful convergence of not just blockchain, but all of these technologies coming together in this revolution?
I mean, this is why I was saying I'm quite happy we're actually applying this and making this available to the people who could potentially benefit from it the most. I mean, just taking the blockchain example again, like the original Bitcoin, the aim was to empower the bottom 1 billion people, right? And there's certainly a risk of people being left out in the sense that some other things, like for example, connectivity or smartphone ownership, prevent some of our even beneficiaries to access the blockchain. But I think those are all time-limited problems. Even like regular cell phones back in the 90s were sort of a luxury item and not everyone could afford them, and now everyone has one form or another. Google, SpaceX, OneWeb, a whole bunch of people are working to bring affordable satellite internet everywhere. So I think in terms of, if we can make this happen and overcome these barriers, again, like blockchain in terms of empowerment for identity, for financial inclusions is very powerful. Some of the other things coming online, CRISPR, for example, gene editing to get rid of diseases, potentially. And of course, it's always controversial, but it's controversial if we make a mistake. But I think nobody would argue if you have a disease-resistant crop, especially, or a crop that's resilient to droughts or bad weather conditions, that could be a bad thing.
Indeed.
But again, the issue is that a lot of the innovation and a lot of the good thinking comes from the private sector when the for-profit motive exists. And a lot of the need for these things is in the sort of a non-profit humanitarian sector. So the challenge there is to how do you incentivize that kind of innovation and thinking for, let's say, humanitarian purposes, but also not just relying on donations and governments and all of these things, but as a business model. And I think blockchain, again, there can come in terms of tokenization as a token economy, and incentivizing the right sort of action at every single step could help us bridge that gap.
Great answer, Houman. Thank you.
No.
Guys, Sam and Nick, I'll ask you the same question to expand on that. Which way do you see this playing out? Because, Nick, going to your quantum computing, I can't help it. I got to pick on quantum computing a little bit. So we'll get to qubits and how things are going to scale. But we have everything from universities to IBM to the most cutting-edge startups with seed funding, and kind of in our hometown working on these things. How do you see this kind of socialist versus capitalist perspective playing out in technology over the next few years?
Well, I think the quantum computing thing is one of the most, let me tell you two hypothetical stories about quantum computing, right? So the biggest concern about quantum computing is that, or one of the biggest concerns would be whoever gets it first gets near infinite power, right? And so you could look at that situation and say, well, Google, right? because with quantum computing, right? So the way quantum computing works is you basically have to have the device you have to have the chips at near absolute zero in demagnetized areas that face no gravitational forces, no sounds, right? So like incredibly complex things to build. Like they go from the ceiling to down here, there'd be this incredible mess of pipes, right? So you need tons of money to build a quantum computer. And you can imagine a scenario where whoever gets a quantum computer first gets like near infinite power, like you're suddenly like 100 years ahead of everybody else, right? And so you can look at that and think, well, we should be scared, right? Do we really want Google to have the first quantum computer? Like, do we really want Microsoft to have the first quantum computer? Do we want these powerful companies to have that? Why don't we regulate the hell out of them? Why don't we make sure that they have to share their quantum resources? Why don't we like slow it down a little bit so that doesn't happen, right? Let's do that, right? That makes sense, right? Everybody in the audience likes that. But you know what's going to happen if we do that? China's going to get a quantum computer way before Baidu, Tencent, Alibaba are going to build their quantum computers way before anybody in the United States. So suddenly they're going to be 100 years ahead now. What have we done then, right? So there's incredibly complicated moral questions about how you either let this technology go forward or pull this technology back. So to the original question of where I stand on the capitalist or socialist thing, my instinct is we have to move ahead, we have to accept the technology, and we have to try to embed, at least for us and for the society, embed the right values in the decision makers who are putting it forward and who are making the products with these incredibly powerful machines.
That's great, thank you.
That's such a perfect segue.
Please,
so
please.
I'm going to pick on Sam for this
Oh,
one.
please do.
Because that takes us right to leadership.
Yes.
So we look at the traits and the qualities over the last couple millennia for our epic leaders.
Right.
What are some of the top 3 to 5 traits moving forward that we're going to need? We just heard Nick explain something that's very progressive, but what's the human side of that?
You know, the number one thing, and I mean, I was just looking at a quote from Lao Tzu, who's a famous Chinese philosopher who wrote about leadership in the same way, in the same kind of definition that I just put out. And I think humility is the number one quality that's often lacking, but it's the quality that has always defined great leaders. There can be aggression and ferocity and vision and commitment, but it can also be humility at the same time. And I think that combination, that push and pull, of people who have that ferocious determination to achieve something, but there's a humility attached to it. I mean, that's really what we're looking for. And oftentimes I think you find in great leaders, you find a reluctance to be in a leadership position. And, you know, we've given up on reluctance. I mean, look at our political process. It's like, you can't want it bad enough, you know, or you can't even be in the running. I mean, Eisenhower didn't want to be president until he was literally dragged out of his apartment in New York by a mob and made to run for president. So we don't see that anymore, but there's a reluctance element too. I don't think there's a big difference over time in effective leadership. I think really what's different are the conditions. And right now we're in a situation where I really think there is a different kind of leadership that will emerge. I wrote in the journal this week about this MIT study about challenge-driven leaders. And they're different from the typical top-down CEO that has a vision and wants to see it realized. They're different. They're more collaborative. They step in and step back depending on their expertise. And
More purpose-based.
they're more thinking. They're more based on ideas and not on outcomes and necessarily process. So I think that's part of it. But I think we have to remember, in these moments of revolution, I mean, no one had more impact on us as a society than Henry Ford. I mean, this is the Industrial Revolution. I mean, he essentially created the middle class. And, you know, thank God he stopped because he had some really bad ideas and, you know. But there's a moment here, I think this generation of entrepreneurs and innovators is really going to create, what you're creating is behavior. And I think that's what we have to think about as people running these companies that have this responsibility. Regulators can never keep up with us. So you're really, what you're selling is you're selling behavior. And you have to think about what is the behavior that's going to be associated with this technology that I'm creating. And is that good behavior? Is that bad behavior? Because you know what I'm tired of is certain people, especially in the social media space, saying, well, we don't know what people are going to do with our technology. Who are we to say what they can and can't do with it? You know, I mean, that's got to stop.
So for leaders of blockchain companies, would you want somebody like blockchain, radical decentralization, democratization? Do you want somebody with real humility and sort of lets everybody decide and sort of fits with the ethos of that? Or do you want somebody who's like, this is all chaos and craziness, I'm going to like crack down on me? Like, you want Bill Belichick or do you want, Lao Tzu here? I guess they're actually pretty similar. You want Bill Belichick?
They're pretty similar. I would take Belichick because you know what? Like, he's aggressive and he's a schemer and he's gonna be aggressive, but at the same time, like, ultimately, like, he's kind of a monk philosopher kind of person. I mean, I don't know. Maybe he's
Belichick coined.
But Houman, I want to drag you into this conversation. How does this apply to some of the UN initiatives? This intersection of leadership.
Leadership to human issues.
Yes.
Well, I mean, I think if you just think about leadership, like at the highest level, let's say, which kind of ties in a little bit about like the political economy and all of these things that we spoke about. I think we really have to think about this from a completely different and radical point of view. I mean, if we take a bit of a historical view on the whole thing, and if we look at the evolution of things, we come from a hunter-gatherer background, right? We spent most of our days looking for food, lived in tribes of about 150 people, and that was pretty much it. Most people knew each other, trusted each other, all of that. And the first real change to that came from the agricultural revolution, which itself was a technology, which for the first time allowed us to have an abundance of food, which means we could save it, which then means we could settle into larger communities and eventually cities, which then gave specialization to things. So for example, blacksmiths could emerge, doctors, politicians, leaders, armies, and all of that. And with that went also the concept of sort of increasing availability of energy. Before it was the energy we had in our own muscles, and from there it went to that animals like horses, steam, electricity, then nuclear power. And those have brought us to where we are, and the political and the economies and the leadership styles and structures that have emerged to facilitate this kind of a society to work. I think we're kind of at a turning point in the sense that with things like artificial general intelligence on horizon and potentially controlled nuclear fusion, I think we're going to live in a future of abundance and also a future of complexity. Already our societies are complex, and in the future we'll also have future machine-to-machine communication, so potentially billions of things going on at the same time. And with this complexity, top-down, let's say, hierarchy doesn't work well because it's very difficult to know the state of a system at any given point in time. So it lends itself better to a more peer-to-peer and decentralized form of economy and thought. And I think also with leadership, because our leadership is always about somebody at the top guiding us, telling us what to do, whereas I think we need potentially a more collaborative, equal, like you could have, there's almost like a specialized leader in an area, but this kind of a concept that you have a CEO and everything then down is just straight down, I think in the future will probably not be as applicable anymore.
Yes, I want to expand on that just a little bit and grow into kind of a more socioeconomic discussion here. So inherent with every industrial revolution, and oftentimes more controversial, is the concept of labor disruption and a massive change in the way we do things. We can take this all the way back to the adoption of steam power, and probably the most relevant example I would use is, during the third revolution that we sit in today, a few guys, three guys specifically, if you listen to the stories, get together, build a little app on their mobile phone, and it suddenly becomes the most valuable company known to humankind, also known as Uber. And it creates an entire labor force, an entire change in the way things are done. Deregulation, everything we knew about how you would take a taxi has changed. Now with this industrial revolution coming forward, all those drivers will likely be out of business within the next 5 to 7 years as self-driving cars take over for them. And we see another radical disruption. So question open to the panel, and Houman, if you'd like to start, certainly up to you, or Nick jumping in, and Sam as well. There is a massive impact on labor forces and on socioeconomic forces. How do you see this playing out with this industrial revolution from a capitalist side?
Absolutely. So I think, every time there's been any major innovation or industrial revolution, but there's been a disruption to labor markets, but overall more jobs have been created. So for example, even with IT, initially people said, people would be out of jobs because this and that is automated, and then people retrained and the IT industry grew.
Indeed.
The Luddites when used to do the fabrics before, there's just so many points in history where people have been displaced but systematically trained and more opportunities have come about. I think that's all before artificial general intelligence. That, I think, will fundamentally change things because it's not about specializing. The machine will be able to do better than you everything. And it doesn't get sick, and it doesn't want to go on home leave, and all of these things. And so I think that's the major disruption, and the things that would lend themselves easiest to that kind of a thing are things that can be easily automated, things that follow a sequence. If this, then do that kind of a thing. So I think in the long term, we don't actually have really any say in that, I think, and that's what I said, it's binary. Either it's good and abundance and it's a utopia, or something bad. But for the interim period, I think what we could do essentially to mitigate the risk, if you wish, is to move away from the specialization. If you remember earlier, I was saying that, we kind of specialize into these crafts as doctors and this and that. I think we need to be more generalist. Even the AI we have is very specialist AI. We can train it to play AlphaGo or chess or something else, but it doesn't have yet the kind of unique ability we have now to see a completely new situation and make sense of it. And that's the one part I think we can hold on to a little bit longer. So instead of, I would say, argue more generalization, less specialization for the first time since agriculture 12,000 years ago.
That's a great comment. So I want to hear from both Nick and Sam. And Sam, I'm going to save you for last, if you don't mind, because I want to go to the conversation you and I had backstage about the specific applications and how it's impacted you at a broad and narrow scale. Nick, I know you've got thoughts on this. So how do you see this?
Well, I think about it kind of on an axis where you can take any profession and you think about it, and this is sort of the I think general intelligence, the machines be able to sort of think in new realms and understand new concepts. We're pretty far away from that. But we're moving much faster in AI within specific realms and more slowly towards AI, general AI. But in any case, as we move into this era, I think of it on as an axis where if you think about a job, how much human interaction, like how much empathy does it require? And then also how repetitive is it? So if it's a super repetitive task that doesn't involve any human interactions, you're kind of toast, right? And you're particularly toast if it's a well-paid job, right? So the job that's like most doomed is paralegals, right? It's like sorting through massive amount of data, highly repetitive task, not a lot of human interaction, and they're paid a lot of money, like see you later, right? Within my profession in journalism, like copy editing is probably one of the first to go because it is relatively repetitive. You can teach a set of rules, and there's not a lot of human interaction, right? Editing, the rules get much more complex, and also the human interaction gets more complex, right? So you're talking to a writer trying to get the best work out of them.
So editors are going to survive.
For a little while. You're okay. You're okay for like another year or two. Like in hospitals, I think this is super interesting, right? So like, if you think about hospitals and sort of the status chain, radiologists are pretty high up there, but they're kind of toast, right? Because what they do is repetitive, and they're mostly in the back end, they're not talking to the patients. The nurses are kind of low in the status chain, but that's all human interaction that nobody's going to want a robot to do. So you might actually get an AI system to replace the radiologists before they replace the nurses. So it doesn't really work the way everybody thinks, where like the highest paying jobs and the highest status jobs stay. It's much more about how much creativity is in it. One of the things I like to think about is my wife, she studied philosophy as an undergraduate, but she spent like all of her time as a dancer, right? Like going up to San Francisco and dancing. And she graduated, the chair of the philosophy department was like, hey, it's gonna be tough, philosophy degree, your life's gonna be hard, at least you're not dancers. And then, now 20 years later, like what are the last two professions that are gonna get destroyed, even after we're gone as editors? They're philosophers and dancers. Like those are the two things that are most set. So like, I'm going to be out of work, but my wife is going to be good.
So Nick, this takes us to an interesting segue. As we move forward, what personal skill sets become important? We've got this continuum and this axis, and I agree with you. Some of the things we would assume that have a higher degree of education would go last, but they won't. They'll go first.
Yep.
But what are some of these skill sets that humans need to be able to compete in this particular market?
Well, creative thinking, empathy, ability to learn new skills because things will be disrupted, and the ability to unplug aggressive machines.
Sam,
You've been waiting for Sam.
Yeah,
I know.
well,
I
wanted
know.
to say,
I would not get
Sam
in the
and I
way.
had a fascinating discussion backstage about kind of, the third generation, essentially the word processor changed things dramatically. And Sam, happens to be very well known for working for one of the last standing and very, very successful media outlets in the world, in the Wall Street Journal, and has done a spectacular job there. And we were talking about how AI had changed your life a little bit individually, right? But I mean, it's a direct segue from what Nick was saying. Thankfully, you don't have a repetitive, objective job, right? By nature, what you do is subjective.
Absolutely.
So how has it impacted you?
Well, I mean, writing when I started, I mean, I was at the end of the typewriter age, and then we had the early computers and word processors, and we've moved into different systems in publishing. I'm sure you've seen them all too. And now we're very fast. We have Nimble. We have much better technology. But we're also, I can see the AI start to show up in the word suggestions and the grammar. The grammar checker's gotten a lot better. All these things are.
Sure has.
And I know at some point.
The grammar checker's going to kill you one
It's
day,
going to
man.
kill me. Because the thing is,
That is your publishing singularity.
no, but here's the
is where the
thing.
grammar
I'm
check can
done.
top you.
Because it's going to learn how I write.
That's right.
And it's going to figure out what word I'm going to use next, and like what my rhythm is, and what
The
point
Sam
I'm gonna
Walker
make.
lexicon.
And I'm going to be useless after I've typed enough in. It can just do it for me. And it's like
Whenever
they will
useless,
just.
you're going to be useful, right? I mean, like, you're going to be...
No, they'll put me in a jar and they'll screw me closed, and the thing will write all my columns for me, and it will do a better job.
So Nick, you're an editor.
Right.
Do you
And
have
I'm
the same
training
innate
it
fear
now
of
to
being
take my
disintermediated
job.
by the AI?
Or ending up in a jar.
Or ending up in a jar.
Screw the lid and.
Houman, I think you're doing pretty well right now. So it's going to be you and 2 jars on stage next year.
And we're training the AI on how to replace us, essentially.
That's
right?
what I'm doing.
Ourselves.
So 3 jars next year.
Can I just say one thing about AI that freaks me out? It freaks me out. You know what? The problem is a lot of people do dumb jobs that don't require. Here's the thing: they like to work. And I mean, that's just the thing. They like going to work every day, and they like working. And AI doesn't care if it's working or not. It doesn't know if it's working. It's all it knows.
No.
So there's that weird element of like people need stuff to do.
No.
And it's not, even if it's not incredibly useful and important, like can AI create things for you to do? Can make it like ordering a pizza really complicated so that it takes you like several hours to get the pizza?
I think, in relation to that, as I was saying, like the future, either I said utopistic or there's nothing. So if there is utopia, the AI is like, smarter than us. There's an abundance of resources. There's enough to eat. Disease has been cured. All of that. And for some reason, we're still around. And in that scenario, then, I think we would be aspirational. So you can do what you want to do, but for the sake of getting joy from it. So if it's art, if it's whatever else. And we might end up, I don't know how the economy of the future might work, but on some sort of a universal basic income kind of a scenario, in which says all of us become beneficiaries, just like the refugees in the video we saw.
But isn't that exactly what Sam fears, right? Like a world of universal basic income where a bunch of companies, really powerful companies, make so much money, and they like where the United States becomes Saudi Arabia, and like Google is the royal family, right? Like that's kind of like the Silicon Valley of universal basic income. Isn't that your nightmare?
But I think it becomes optional, as opposed to everyone does nothing. I'm just saying then you're not forced to do a job you don't like just because you need the money, but whatever you pursue to do, you do it because you like doing it.
So I was trying to think of a time of real great abundance, and I thought of Renaissance Italy. Great flowering of the arts, right? Incredible. And a system of patronage and, a great artistic explosion, right? So that's possible. But I also think about other times where, even in the current place we're in, it just feels like people start arguing a lot and getting it seems like it could either be a great explosion of art and wonderful things, or it could be just violence and hatred. I think those are the two directions it could go. Because if you have a lot of time in your hands, what are you going to do? Something positive or something very negative?
I guess I'm going to say that the whole universal basic income idea gives me the heebie-jeebies. Most everybody in Silicon Valley is into it, and I think they're into it as like a defensive mechanism. I hate it.
I work for the Wall Street Journal, so obviously I'm not going there.
Right.
We're
The man will be fired before the end of the night.
That assumes we have a choice in it, though.
Yeah.
But I don't think we're actually going to reach that point, because I do think, like what you said earlier, that at least in the future we can foresee of the next 20 years, AI is going to the technology will create jobs, and it will create jobs we don't understand. So it's not like work will go away and we'll need to give people money. There will be a lot of churn, but all kinds of crazy new jobs will be created that we can't imagine right now, and I can't tell you what they are. So I don't think we're going to have this, like, have to make the choice about utopia, whether we want everybody to create art or whether we want to pay them or whether we want to force them to work somehow.
But I don't think it's a choice that we make. That's my point. I think it's something we'll find out. But I think we also need to, and this might go a little, I'm thinking beyond 20 years, definitely, in the things I'm talking about. But I do think we also need to consider what it even means to be human at some point.
Definitely.
Right? We are already like our smartphones, our computers are an expansion of ourselves, our memory, our computing skills in terms of crunching numbers. And if we continue expanding that, then a lot of this division and arguing, it's so easy to divide people on a binary basis, on soccer fans, on music, of course on politics, on many other things. And a lot of it comes from those tribal instincts I was talking about earlier. We were in tribes of 150 people, which meant we were practically all genetically related. Anyone from somewhere else, we're very acute in observing differences because a slight difference is a threat to your gene pool.
Yeah.
And these are instincts that don't serve us anymore. And I'm thinking far out in the future enough, maybe these will also be resolved in a way that, we don't end up arguing about just everything.
So Houman, I'd like to expand on that, if I may. And I'm actually going to ask you to join this one as well, as my co-moderator. You're talking about the positive and negative impact, essentially, of technology or a revolution. We all come from relatively the same generation where we were told technology was going to change everything, and you're going to have so much time on your hands. You're not going to know what to do with yourselves. But statistically speaking, we all work more, have more stress, and have less time. That said, our tribes have expanded dramatically. Whether you read Seth Godin or not in The Power of Tribes, we can look broader and say we are now truly a global village. There's a pro and a con to it. I'd like your genuine, kind of candid opinions. Is this next industrial revolution? A, do you believe it's real? And if so, is it a positive or negative thing? Nick.
Yes, it's absolutely real. Yes, it's generally positive. Subsidiary question, the most important question in it, or one of the most important questions in it, is does it make us more tribal or not? Because what technology did for the first 15 years or so was I thought it was making us come together, right? We're all learning the same language. We all speak kind of the same language on the internet. We can learn, make the world more open and connected. We learn about people in different cultures. We can connect with anybody here. And it seemed like for a while, the internet was bringing us together, right? We all read Robert Wright's book, Non-Zero, right? We all, that seemed like the arc of human history. And then the last 5 years, it's gone completely in reverse, right? And maybe it's just partly something about being in the middle of the Trump-Clinton America, but maybe there's something also where it really is moving in the opposite direction because of what you said. We are so attuned to tribal differences, and technology makes us see them and the way the Facebook algorithm works. So I think, yes, it's coming. Yes, it will create more jobs. Yes, it will be good. One thing that is at stake is will we become more tribal or less, and I do not know the answer.
Sam, what's your thought?
I think it's definitely real and positive generally. I think the first thing that we're going to see, and I think this is when I think people's perspective about technology will start to change, because what you see once in a while, and you see this just going about your life, you'll see that someone has figured out something that was always a pain in the ass for you, but they figured out a way to erase it. And you never thought that it would ever go away. It was just, that's just how it works. But then you see it go away, and you see a simpler way, and you're just, I just saved myself the anxiety that usually comes with something that's not fun. And I think that is innovation to people. And I think that's what we're going to start seeing when AI and blockchain start to kick in. We'll start to see, there'll be a very initial euphoria of, there's so much low-hanging fruit, medical records. I'm trying to buy a car right now, and, I'm like, Carfax. I mean, maybe it works. Maybe there's missing.
Absolutely.
But it's, these things will start to be a lot easier. And I think there's going to be an initial wave of euphoria about this is making our lives better. And I think that will predominate for a while.
20 years ago, the idea of buying something online was a terrifying proposition.
Terrifying.
Now the idea of buying a car online, sight unseen, is not so scary.
Well, I'm still shredding all anything that's got my credit card.
You bought a car online, sight unseen? Because that's crazy.
That is crazy.
Maybe a few. Nick, we'll continue backstage. Sam, please.
Anyway, the idea, just the little things, just worrying about identity theft, worrying about all these things that are terrifying for us. I think there'll be a great euphoria when we start to realize what happens. What comes next, I don't know. And there will be a downside and some negative things we have to deal with. But I think in the short term, it's going to be, people are really going to grow to like it.
And Houman, to you.
I think we're definitely on the verge of whatever we want to call it, industrial revolution or not, of another, let's say, burst of advancement, generally speaking. There's a book by a gentleman called Steven Pinker called The Better Angels of Our Nature, which argues, and sometimes convincingly, that overall, despite the fact that we hear so much about war and about, displacement and all of these things, overall, our conditions and standards of living have improved over time. And I think what's coming next will contribute to that. So I don't think it would be a revolutionary change. We will sort of continue making incremental improvements. But again, I go back to the point of the moment where artificial general intelligence arrives. At that point, the key thing here is that, there's some, again, convincingly, who argue that there may be no free will at all. But if there is, at least so far, we've actually made choices that have brought this progress, and people have thought about it, and people have accepted it or not, and whatever. I think what will change at that point, which is much harder to predict what will happen after that, is I don't believe we'll have a say in the matter.
No. Great.
I'm going to actually take this and add to a conversation we all had backstage and kind of take that question to the next level and personalize it. So we're all saying, yes, it's happening. We all agreed backstage that we're all wearing multiple hats now. 2018 is about how many different hats we're wearing, how many different universes are converging upon us in our own personal worlds. Is there a version of this where AI actually helps us become more productive? And there's a good spin on this where it brings us to a level where we're utilizing it for our personal gain and not necessarily having a robot take over, ending up in a jar, or any of those things, but it's actually augmenting our personal lives.
Definitely, 100%. Self-driving cars, perfect example. Self-driving cars are going to be awesome. It's so great. I'm going to love not having to drive. I'm going to love being in a more efficient car that's been designed for human space as opposed to designed to have like a steering wheel and all these other things. I'm thrilled. I hope they're ready. I need them to be ready in 6 years when my kids get their driver's license because I don't want them to get crashed. I don't want them to drive at a very dangerous age. So yeah, there are all kinds of these technologies that are going to come. They're going to be, make our lives simpler, better in all kinds of ways, make us more productive. But what's so weird is that all these other tools are making us more productive happen, right? Email, so productive, right? It's so much better than writing a letter. You don't have to write it out by hand, right? Nobody likes emails more than letters now, right? Because you create the efficiency and then you create the time. So it is a question of how these things are built and how we adapt to them.
The thing that I think will be good about the multitasking situation we talked about is, I think when you have an idea, we were talking about this too, it's hard to scale an idea that you have. It's hard to reach the right people who really want to hear it or want to know about it. And, hopefully there'll be, because I think, the machines are still going to rely on us for really original ideas that address problems that people have in the real world. It's going to be a long time before that general intelligence can really do that for us. And so, maybe when we do have an idea or concept, AI and some of these technologies will really help us realize it and quickly scale it and make sure that it's out there for the people who want to know about it. But no, I think we're going to leave these crazy peripatetic lives where we're doing a million things. And this will probably make it worse for a while, right? Because everything's so much easier to do. And, I don't know.
All right.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I agree with the points. I do think technology, like most things, depends on how you use it. Like electricity, you could, execute someone with it, and you could also do deep brain stimulation for a Parkinson patient. So I think for the most part, I see positive benefits, of course, as with most other technologies. For things that make our life simpler, or for things that could make it worse if somebody are mining our data to sell us even more things we don't need and all of that. So yeah, but I think the trend is generally positive with technology, and it eventually is applied in the right way.
But there's an interesting, can I add an interesting moral question to this? So let's say that we're all convinced that this is going to be good. We're more than 50% this is going to be good. And what if I'm 99% convinced it's going to be good, but 1% convinced it's going to lead to the total obliteration of human species, right? So then, if you take that, well, then what do you do? What are your obligations as you design it? Okay, so I'm 1% convinced it's going to be terrible, but 99% it's going to be good. So I'll just design an off switch, right? There'll be some off ramp, and we'll figure out at that point. But there's no way to design an off switch because by the time you get to the point you realize you need an off switch, you've already created something way too sophisticated that it could destroy your off switch, right? So how do you actually, it's a really hard philosophical problem to grapple with. I think the future will be better. I'm pretty confident the future will be better. I'm a little bit worried it's going to be just awful.
I mean, for me, there's no choice, right? For me, that it's happening anyway, so it's better just to root for the thing that is going to be better.
Well, you can root for it, but how do you plan, right?
You can't. I don't think you can plan for, at least for artificial general intelligence, I don't really think, as you said, you can create an off switch. There's so many ways it can't work. But I mean, I see
so
that.
It's like we're on the roller coaster, like we're just
but
doing
I think
it.
this
Bought
is
the
a
ticket,
much closer argument for it. I don't think quantum computing is really what you said about the race between countries. I mean, quantum computing can help in certain things, but it's not necessarily better in all aspects. Like it can help with factoring prime numbers for cryptography, which has an implication for blockchain, but then there's ways of around that. You double the bit rate, there is lattice-based cryptography. If you can fold proteins, it can be great for medicine. But I think it's the arms race is for the general intelligence that whoever comes up with it first will be thousands of years ahead. And
But I want to take a moment to thank you guys for the time because we want to continue this over drinks during the entertainment tonight. So if you guys would, please, a big round of a hand for our speakers and panelists tonight.